Hey everyone, it's Samantha and I'm here with another video for you, obviously. And I'm going to be trying something new, and that's Top 5 Wednesday. If you haven't heard of Top 5 Wednesday, it is this group on Goodreads that's hosted by Lainey and Samantha, and I'll make sure to put the link to the group down below. That they post questions that you can talk about for booktube videos or for blogging or whatever it may be, whatever your blogging choice is, and just being able to talk about books. If you're having difficulty with coming up with conversation starters or for video ideas, Top 5 Wednesday is a great place to go. So I'm giving it a try, and you should too. Let me know if you joined the group, and that way we can talk together about some ideas. This week's topic is books you thought you'd hate but ended up loving. And Sam and Lainey were saying that it doesn't need to necessarily be from hate to love, but just having that change of you weren't really feeling the book at the beginning and then you ended up actually enjoying it at the end. So we're going to go over my 5 picks for this list. I want to also point out that I don't have these in any specific order on the amounts that I liked the book from, or my opinion changed from the beginning to the end. Is just random. So the first book that I'm going to be talking about is The Elfstones of Shannara by Terry Brooks. For those of you who don't know, Terry Brooks has a huge saga of the Shannara series. With the first book, The Sword of Shannara, I read the book and I enjoyed it, but it definitely is very Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring remakey, because Tolkien's influence was just so huge at that time. So it didn't really seem that original. And so I was very hesitant about going into the second book, but I wanted to at least give it a try. And so I picked this up. At the beginning, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get because it seemed like it was the same startup of, it was even the same family that's involved. It's a couple generations later, and the same wizard dude comes in and says, oh, you have to save the world. And I was like, oh God, not this again. But honestly, that's where the similarities ended. The rest of the book takes on its own story, its own path. I found myself really enjoying this book. Considering how dense it is, it's about 560 pages. I actually remember flying through this relatively quickly because the action was really intense and kept me into it. I also already knew some of the characters previously, so that helped with getting on with the story, but I definitely had to read the first one in order to understand who those characters were. So maybe do like a quick read on Wiki or something of the first book just to know character names, and then dive into this one. It was really good. The next book on my list is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This book, as you can see, is definitely very 80s themed, and you look on the back, it looks like it came straight from an 80s movie. So this book is about these two friends who get to know each other, and one of them starts to have some problems by being possessed by a demon and needing an exorcism, in case you didn't get that part. When I picked up this book, I thought it was going to be mainly about her being possessed and that being the main story of this book. So when I picked it up and it was focusing a lot on the friendship between the two characters, I wasn't as hooked as I wanted to be. I wanted this to be a fun, scary read, and I just wasn't getting that. It was more about the friendship. But as I went through the book, probably about halfway mark or so, is when I really appreciated the friendship that was developed later on. The exorcism stuff, or the demon possession stuff, starts earlier for sure, like probably a third of the way through the book. But this book is mainly focused on the friendship, and if I had really paid attention to the back cover, that's what it focuses on, is how it's focused on their relationship. How many times can I say focus? Focus, focus, focus. So once I got to the end of this book, I was really appreciating all that development. It made a really big impact on the conclusion, the climax of this book, and I definitely love it now. I'm so glad it's on my shelf. Definitely going to be reading this one again and highly recommend it. Even for you people out there who aren't into horror at all, this is a good read because, like I said, it focuses more on their relationship rather than the possessive exorcism stuff. I recommend. The next book that I'm going to be talking about is actually one that I've read recently, and that is Slate House by David Mitchell. Now, this is a book that I actually wanted to pick up closer to Halloween because I heard it was a scary story, and on the back cover it's talking about haunted houses, which is my weak point. I love a good haunted house story. So I wanted to pick it up around Halloween, but my library didn't have it available. So when I last went to the library, saw it was on the shelf, I immediately grabbed it. It's a pretty short book. I think it was only 230 pages, and then it's also pretty short. The picture's a little misleading, but it's a small book. At the very beginning, I was having difficulty with getting hooked by the story because it's told from the perspective of a little boy. So I wasn't really connecting with the character, but I could tell that there was something going on. By the time I got to the end of that chapter or that section, I was like, okay, I wonder what's going to happen next, because I didn't know how the writer was going to be able to continue the story based off what the first part was. I'm not going to spoil it because it's interesting. I liked it. By the time I got to the second chapter, I'm like, oh, interesting. It's a different perspective. It happens years later, and it kind of builds off of what happened in the first story. And it happens again and again, and it just keeps on building and building and building. I'm like, huh, that is not what I was expecting, but I definitely enjoyed it. So definitely not scary. I wouldn't have nightmares over it. It definitely has a little bit of that creep factor, but I highly recommend it, even for my friends who don't necessarily love the horror genre and don't want to go to bed with a nightmare. I recommend this book as well. It was pretty good. The next book I'm going to be talking about is actually a book that I read years ago. I think I read it in 2014, I want to say. But it has actually left a lasting impression on my memory. So that's why it's on this list. It's actually a literary fiction novel. Hey BookTube, I just realized that I didn't even say the name of this book and the author. So here I am to update you. It is The Garden of Evening Mist by Tan Tuan Eng. And I'll put the cover here so you know what it looks like. But it is set in Malaya, 1949. Malaya is now referred to as a part of Malaysia. The main character is Young Ling Teo, who is a woman of Japanese descent and is helping prosecute some of the Japanese war criminals. She's just trying to get a break from it all, and so she decides to go back to her home country of Malaya. And while she's there, she finds an individual who is maintaining a Japanese garden, traditional Japanese garden in the middle of Malaya. It's the only one in the whole country. This garden is owned and tended by a man named Yugiri, who is of Japanese descent. She finds it so relaxing and peaceful. She asks Yugiri if he would be able to make a Japanese garden in memory of her sister who had actually died in a Japanese camp. Yugiri declines the offer. He does not want to make the garden for her, but he says that he will spend the time until the monsoon comes to train her and teach her on how to make her own Japanese garden in memory of her sister. So the majority of the book is spent on their relationship and the conflict that there is, because she has a huge prejudice against anyone who's Japanese for what they did to her sister ultimately by her dying. And she is trying to come to terms with that relationship that she's building, but also why there's so much conflict in the country at the time. It wasn't necessarily a book I thought I would be interested in. I only picked it up because it was on the list for the Man Booker Prize for that year, and my Goodreads group was challenging people to read a Man Booker Prize book, and I picked that one up by some happenstance, and I'm so glad I did. In the beginning, you know, it's literary fiction. It's not my cup of tea, but as I started to get to know the characters and to see that relationship, I was just absolutely in love with it. And like I said, it's left a lasting memory on me even after reading it so many years ago. So this last book is a little bit of a cheat because I fell in love with it relatively quickly. And that book is The Passage by Justin Cronin. It's the first book in the series. I believe it's trilogy at this time. I don't think there's any plans to expand it. But it is a book basically talking about how the end of the world is coming into play and people trying to survive, but the end of the world isn't necessarily zombies. I'm going to leave it at that because it was a surprise for me, and I think that's the way it should be enjoyed, is as a surprise. And maybe it was already ruined for you, but I'm so glad that I didn't know anything going into it. So I'm just gonna leave you with that. When I first picked up the book, I mean, it's a chunker. I haven't seen, chunk. I think it was like 600, 700 pages, and they were big pages. So I was already a little overwhelmed on reading it, even though I love my big books, if you can't tell. But I really heard a lot of good things about it. I was like, I'll give it a try. I'll read a chapter and see if I get into it or not. I read the first chapter and I was like, so basically the first chapter was about how this girl's mom and dad met, and then they had her, and then her growing up, and then she's left at this church and her mom just kind of walks away and abandons her. And that's the first chapter, and I was like, kind of want to know what happens, but I mean, I could take it or leave it. But then the second chapter happens. I read the first paragraph of that second chapter and I was hooked. I could not put that book down for anything. I wanted to know what was going to happen, and I knew something was going to happen with that girl, but I didn't know what. Oh, so good. So good. I loved it. I highly recommend it. I still have yet to read books 2 and 3. We'll get there, and maybe I'll do a spoilery review later on, but loved the book. Loved it. Those are my top 5 picks for this topic. Feel free to leave your top 5 picks at the bottom, or if one of the books I've read is also one of your top 5, let me know. I love to talk to you about it. Otherwise, have a good day, and I'll see you next time.